Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rockland Graves. These last few weeks have felt excruciatingly long with the wait for Halloween Ends, but it's finally here. This review will be completely spoiler-free, so if you haven't seen the film yet, rest assured I will not be giving anything away. Let me start by making it very clear that I am a hardcore Halloween fan. I've spent the last 6 months working on reviews for the current timeline of films, and I've watched every entry in the series multiple times. Even the worst ones. I am through and through a Halloween nerd, so I really can't speak for general audiences going to this movie or for fans who just aren't as obsessed with this series as I am. I've really enjoyed David Gordon Green's last 2 Halloween movies, and Halloween Ends is a huge curveball that wound up being one of the most unique entries in the series. I don't think anyone was expecting this to be how this trilogy would conclude, and I guarantee this is going to be one of the most divisive movies in the entire franchise. I mean, I think it's going to be more divisive than Halloween Kills, man. This is a weird one. Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills were 2 very different movies, but this is such a huge shift in tone and direction that I honestly wouldn't blame anyone for feeling completely alienated by this movie. It goes to some really weird and unexpected places, with the focus being shifted from the narrative that's been built up since 2018. And I do have to admit, it's quite a jarring shift. That being said, I do also have to be honest and say that I actually found myself really enjoying this movie, despite how much of an oddball it is for the series. I walked away from this film so intrigued by the direction it took, even if it's not how I personally would have ended things. This is less of a slasher movie and more a character drama for the majority of its runtime. The focus here is not on Michael, it's not on kills. This is a purely character-driven narrative, and I think that your enjoyment of it largely depends on what you look for in a Halloween film. Even if you loved Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, you are not guaranteed to have a good time with this film. If you watch these movies for Michael, I think you're going to be severely disappointed with this movie. He got a huge focus in Kills, but he really takes a back seat in this one. Laurie and Allison both get a lot more screen time here, which is great, but the biggest focus is actually on a brand new character and storyline. This is where I think a lot of the movie's biggest issues come from. This is the final Halloween film in this continuity, and there were a lot of characters and arcs from the last 2 movies that felt like they needed to be fleshed out and expanded upon, but this movie instead opts to focus on someone brand new to this film. That's a really strange move for this movie to make, but I did enjoy it regardless of how disjointed it kind of feels from the last 2. It's carried by performances and everyone does a really good job. Jamie Lee Curtis gets to give a really interesting performance, which is like a combination of the Laurie that we've seen in the last 2 films and the Laurie that we saw in 1978. Considering she spent pretty much all of Halloween Kills in a hospital bed, it's nice that she gets more to do in this movie. There is a 4-year time jump between Kills and Ends, and it would have been nice to fill things in a little more to give more context to the headspace everyone's in. Laurie especially could have used this extra context, because where we see her at the beginning of Halloween Ends is a huge shift from where we saw her at the end of Halloween Kills, especially if you're looking at the ending in the extended cut of that movie. Halloween Ends really made me realize how little we've actually gotten to see of who Allison is as a person. She's really only needed to react to the events that are going on around her in the last 2 movies, but here we get a look into what she's actually like, at least how she is following the events of Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills. Andi Matichak is at her best in this movie, which is something I can say about a lot of the actors considering how much more character-driven this movie is. The darker and more serious nature of this movie allows for some truly harrowing moments which are carried by the fantastic performances in the entire cast. Rohan Campbell plays the new character that I've been alluding to, and he has a lot on his shoulders in this role. He gets a lot of attention in this film, and he is without a doubt the biggest thing that people who hate this movie are going to point out about it. This is unfortunate because Rohan is really good in the role and brings some weight to a storyline that otherwise could have been unbearable with poor casting. It's really thanks to his performance that I was able to get so invested in the new direction this film takes, and I worry that it's going to be so divisive that Rohan's not going to get the props he deserves, because he's really, really good. I think the only actor who doesn't really get a chance to give their best performance is James Jude Courtney as Michael Myers. Courtney has made it very clear that he's not interested in playing Michael again, and with how good he's been in the last 2 movies, it would have been nice to see him give one last explosive performance for this finale, but due to the nature of this story and how Michael's handled, he doesn't really get the chance to do that. Michael is far from the machine he was at the end of Kills, and his screen time is way more limited than you're probably going to expect going into this movie. James Hugh Courtney is, of course, great in what he does get to do, but that's very limited just due to the portrayal of Michael in this movie being so different from anything we've seen in the series. There are some bizarre moments for Michael and some things that felt really out of character for the way he's been built up in the last two movies. It almost feels like there should have been another movie between Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends to fill us in on the huge character changes between movies, and it doesn't help that a lot of the most pivotal scenes of this movie feel rushed and like they could have used more time to be fleshed out and developed. This film really could have used an extra 10 or 15 minutes just to give scenes more time to breathe. I did say that this movie is less of a slasher and more of a character drama, but the kills that are there are handled in a much more serious and less over-the-top manner than the death scenes in Halloween Kills were. One death was particularly gruesome. It got quite a reaction from the theater. I've been thinking about that scene quite a bit. There is an element to the kills that will make them less satisfying for Halloween fans, but I really can't get into that without spoiling things, so I'll save that for a more in-depth video down the road. If you were hoping for more stalking scenes than we've seen in the last two, you're probably going to be disappointed. The horror here comes more so from some very harrowing and gruesome moments that are handled much more believably and in a more grounded way than the previous film. You won't get much of the slow stalking you saw in the original movie. There's a lot more psychological horror in here than you might be expecting as well. There's some very interesting descent into madness territory that this movie gets into. It's beautifully shot, as we've come to expect from this trilogy, and it's greatly complemented by some really, really good set design. Again, the film really captures the Midwestern vibes, and the soundtrack is obviously really good. It's John Carpenter, Cody Carpenter, and Daniel Davies again. They have a proven track record now. It's a much slower and more somber film than the last one, and this is reflected in the score. Apart from the narrative and character choices, it's also a massive departure in tone. I want to keep this review as vague as possible, so without spoiling anything, this film feels much closer to another John Carpenter classic horror film than it does to the original Halloween, and a lot of parallels can be drawn between that film and Halloween Ends. I did really enjoy this movie, and I'm looking forward to watching it again, but I do feel that in terms of a conclusion for this trilogy, it leaves a lot to be desired. The story we've been following gets sidelined for something brand new that's really weird and out there and very strange for this series, and it feels like it would have worked better as a self-contained movie as opposed to the conclusion to a trilogy. David Gordon Green has said that he gets bored doing the same things over and over again, so I understand why he wanted to do something completely different with this movie, but he also did sign on to do a Halloween trilogy. Making the last film in that trilogy be such a massive departure in tone, character, and narrative is a ballsy decision, especially for such a high-profile franchise. And while I do respect that David Gordon Green made the movie he wanted to make, this is going to be such a controversial movie that will not be satisfying for a lot of fans. It not only doesn't fill in a lot of the holes from Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills that I was hoping would be filled in, but there are even things in this new storyline that feel unfinished. I am not someone who needs the answer to every question in a movie, and I absolutely see the value in viewer interpretation. But it would have been nice for the film to clarify certain things more than it does because of how out of nowhere some of them feel. This is another reason I feel like the movie's just too short for its own good. It does give a definitive ending to this story, but if it were up to me, this film would have been a much more focused and direct conclusion to this trilogy to make things feel more satisfying and complete. The last 20 minutes of this movie are really great, but there are some key moments here that feel really rushed in favor of this new story that's being told, and I feel like it's at the detriment to a lot of other elements of the film. It doesn't even help that the conclusion to this new story ends sort of abruptly and not necessarily in a satisfying way, and it has absolutely no bearing on the rest of the movie, so it winds up feeling a bit like a throwaway plot point. Not that it is a throwaway plot, it just feels that way because of how the rest of the movie is handled, and it leads to the narrative feeling pretty disjointed as a whole. Overall though, I did enjoy this movie, and I'm gonna need to give it a few more viewings to really figure things out for myself and let it set in a little more. I actually think this movie is gonna age really well, because most of my issues with it stem from its placement in this overall story. I think that as a self-contained movie, this is going to gain a huge cult following eventually, similar to Halloween 3, because on its own merits, this is a really solid movie, even with how disjointed it can feel at times. It will without a doubt be one of the most divisive movies in the series, and I will not be surprised to hear if anyone has this movie really low on their list of Halloween films, but I thought it was really well made and gave a serviceable ending to this storyline. I found myself really invested in this new story and the characters, and I enjoy how fresh the movie is. I do think your enjoyment of this film hinges on how open you are to the huge shifts in focus and also, again, what you look for in a Halloween film. It's far from a straight-up slasher film and requires a more attentive viewing than the other movies. It asks some hefty questions that it doesn't always answer, and it takes a lot of characters in directions that you wouldn't expect. It's a very strange way to end this trilogy, but there is a lot of good here. There's a lot here that I really enjoyed, and the ending was satisfying and emotional, even if it didn't hit quite as hard as I was hoping it would. Once the movie's out on Blu-ray, I'll do a more in-depth video similar to what I did on the other movies in this timeline, but for now, those are my thoughts on Halloween Ends after my first viewing. Before I end the video, I just wanted to thank you for the support on the Halloween Kills video I put out a few days ago. It's the best performing video I've put out on this channel, so I just wanted to acknowledge that and say thanks. I put a lot of work into it, so it's nice to see that pay off. Thank you for stopping by Rockland Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.